A single mom took the risk no one else would, one Hell's Angel, made sure she was never forgotten. The sun had not yet cleared the ridge behind Cedar Falls when Maria Torres unlocked the front door of the Blue Plate Diner. The morning air was cold enough to fog her breath, and she rubbed her hands together as she flipped on the lights. 6 in the morning came early, but it came every day, whether she was ready for it or not. She tied her apron behind her back, pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, and checked her reflection in the napkin dispenser. Tired eyes looked back at her. She smiled anyway. Sophia was still asleep at Mrs. Kim's house next door, dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dreamed. And Maria intended to make sure that when her daughter woke up, the world felt safe and good, even if her own feet ached before the first customer walked in. By 6:30, the regulars started to trickle in. Old Man Peterson took his usual stool at the counter and ordered his usual eggs over easy, dry toast, black coffee. 2 women from the church came in whispering about the choir schedule. A trucker Maria didn't recognize sat in the back, scrolling on his phone. Maria moved through it all like water, refilling cups before they were empty, remembering who liked ketchup on the side and who wanted extra napkins without asking. She didn't have to think about it anymore. Kindness was just a muscle she used until it hurt. And then, she used it a little more. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. At 7:15, the bell above the door jingled, and Duke Callahan walked in. He was a big man, built like something poured rather than born, with gray threading through his beard and ink crawling up one forearm from beneath his rolled sleeve. His leather vest carried patches that most people in Cedar Falls didn't understand and didn't want to. He walked with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who knew people were watching him and had stopped caring a long time ago. The church women stopped whispering about the choir. Old Man Peterson's eyes flicked toward the door and then quickly away, like looking too long might invite trouble. The trucker in the back pretended to be very interested in his phone. Duke didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't let it show. He walked to his usual booth in the far corner, the one by the window that nobody else ever sat in even when the diner was full, and lowered himself into the seat like a man setting down a heavy load. "Morning, Duke," Maria said, already pouring his coffee before he asked. "Black, no sugar, the same as always." "Morning," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel under a tire. "The usual? Eggs, bacon, hash browns?" He nodded. Maria wrote it down even though she didn't need to, and headed for the kitchen window to call it in to the cook. She didn't flinch away from Duke's table the way some folks didn't rush the coffee pour or avoid eye contact. To her, he was just a man who came in twice a week and left a decent tip and never gave her any trouble at all. She figured people could be a lot of things underneath what they looked like on the outside, and she wasn't in the business of guessing. The day rolled on the way most days did at the Blue Plate. Orders came and went. The lunch rush hit like a wave and receded just as fast, leaving dirty plates and crumpled napkins in its wake. Maria's feet screamed at her by 2 o'clock, but she kept moving, kept smiling, kept refilling coffee cups for men who barely looked up to thank her. She thought about Sophia during the slow stretches, about the drawing her daughter had made that morning of the 2 of them holding hands under a yellow sun, taped now to the fridge with a strip of blue painter's tape. She thought about the light bill that was due and the brakes on her car that were making a sound she didn't like, which was why it now sat in Hendrick's garage instead of the diner parking lot. By the time the dinner crowd thinned out and the clock crept toward 7, Maria's whole body felt like it had been wrung out like a dish rag. She untied her apron, punched her time card, and grabbed her jacket from the hook by the kitchen. Duke was still in his booth, nursing a second cup of coffee she hadn't remembered pouring. He must have flagged down the evening waitress for it. He looked up as she passed. "Night, Duke," she said, giving him a small wave. He gave her a nod, barely more than a tilt of his chin, but it was there, and it was more than most people got from him in a week. Maria pushed through the door and stepped out into the cooling evening, the diner's warm light spilling onto the sidewalk behind her as she began the long walk home. Maple Street was quiet in the way small towns get quiet at dusk, when the day's noise settles down like dust after a car passes. Maria walked with her hands tucked into her jacket pockets, her sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. The streetlights hadn't come on yet, but the sky was turning that soft purple color that meant they would soon. She thought about Sophia. Mrs. Kim always fed her a little snack after school, usually crackers with peanut butter, and Sophia would be sitting at the kitchen table right now, swinging her legs because they didn't reach the floor, waiting for her mom to come get her. Maria smiled at the thought. Just a few more minutes and she'd be scooping her daughter up into a hug that smelled like grape juice and crayons. She was passing the old hardware store, its windows dark and the open sign flipped to closed, when she heard it. A screech, loud and sharp, like metal dragging against metal, tires fighting for grip on pavement. Maria's head snapped toward the sound. At the intersection of Maple and 5th, a big delivery truck was barreling through the stop sign like it wasn't even there. Maria saw the logo painted on the side in bold blue letters before she saw anything else. Whitfield Trucking. The truck didn't slow down. It didn't even seem to try. And then she saw the bike. A small figure on a bicycle, pedaling across the intersection, right into the truck's path. No. The word tore out of Maria's throat before she even knew she was screaming it. The truck clipped the back tire of the bicycle, and the boy went flying. His body twisting through the air before it hit the pavement with a sound Maria would hear in her nightmares for weeks afterward. The bicycle crumpled beneath the truck's back wheels, metal screeching against asphalt. The truck didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. It kept rolling through the intersection and disappeared around the corner, taillights flashing once before they vanished. Maria was already running. Her legs carried her faster than she thought they could, her work shoes slapping against the pavement as she sprinted toward the boy lying motionless in the street. She dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the way the asphalt bit into her skin through her jeans. It was Danny Reyes. She recognized him from the diner, where his mother sometimes brought him in for pancakes on Sunday mornings. He was maybe 9 years old, with a mop of dark hair and a gap between his front teeth. Right now his eyes were closed, his small body twisted at an angle that made Maria's stomach drop. "Danny? Danny, honey, can you hear me?" Her voice shook, but she kept it steady enough for him to hear, if he could hear anything at all. His eyes fluttered. A small groan escaped his lips. Alive. He was alive. "Don't move, okay? Just stay still. Help is coming." Maria's hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and dialed 911, pressing the phone hard against her ear. 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's been an accident. A boy's been hit by a truck. He's not moving right. We need an ambulance. We're on Maple Street at the corner of 5th. Please hurry. Please hurry." The words spilled out of her in a rush. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm." Help is on the way. Can you tell me if the boy is breathing? Maria looked down at Danny's chest. It rose and fell, shallow but steady. Yes, he's breathing. While she spoke, her eyes flicked to the corner where the truck had disappeared, and she caught the last glimpse of the license plate before it vanished from sight. She repeated it out loud, over and over, burning it into her memory like a brand. Whiskey Tango 472. Whiskey Tango 472. She said it into the phone too, making sure the dispatcher wrote it down. Footsteps pounded up behind her. Danny's mother, Elena Reyes, came running from the house on the corner, her face already twisted with terror before she even reached them. Danny. Oh God. Danny. My baby. She dropped to the ground beside her son, sobbing, her hands hovering over him like she was afraid to touch him and make things worse. He's breathing, Maria said gently, reaching out to grip Elena's shaking hand. The ambulance is coming. I saw everything. I got the truck's plate number. I'm going to tell the police exactly what happened, I promise you that. Elena looked up at her, eyes wet and desperate. You saw it? You saw who did this? I saw it, Maria said, and I'm not going to stay quiet about it. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Maria sat in a plastic chair across from Sheriff Collins' desk, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Danny's small body flying through the air. Sheriff Collins was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. He'd been sheriff of Cedar Falls for as long as Maria could remember. He clicked his pen and pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. All right, Mrs. Torres, walk me through it again. From the beginning. Maria took a breath. I was walking home from my shift at the diner. I heard tires screeching, and I looked up and saw the truck run the stop sign at Maple and Fifth. It was a Whitfield Trucking delivery truck, big blue letters on the side. It hit Danny's bike and didn't even slow down. And you got the plate number? Whiskey Tango 472, Maria said, the same way she'd said it a dozen times already, to the 911 dispatcher, to the officer on scene, to Elena Reyes. She'd burned it into her brain so deep she thought she'd be saying it in her sleep for the rest of her life. Collins wrote it down, though Maria noticed he didn't seem to write it as fast as the rest. His pen moved slower on that part. She told herself she was imagining things. Anyone else out there see it happen? He asked, not looking up. I don't know. It was getting dark. But there were a few shops still open on that block. Someone else had to have seen something. Collins nodded slowly and set his pen down. All right, we'll follow up. I want to thank you for coming in. Mrs. Torres takes guts to speak up like this. Something about the way he said it made Maria's stomach twist, though she couldn't have said why. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself that with a clear plate number and her own eyes as proof, this would be simple. The truck was Whitfield's. The truth was the truth. Surely that would be enough. She walked home that afternoon feeling lighter than she had in days. Justice, she thought, was already in motion. But the days that followed proved her wrong. It started small. 2 days later, Maria was refilling coffee cups at the Blue Plate Diner when she overheard Mrs. Alvarez, who ran the flower shop down on 5th Street, talking to another regular at the counter. Terrible thing. What happened to that Reyes boy? Mrs. Alvarez said, stirring sugar into her coffee. But you know, When the deputy came by asking questions, I told him I didn't see a thing. I was in the back of the shop watering plants. Never even heard the crash till the sirens came. Maria's coffee pot hovered in the air, frozen. She knew for a fact that Mrs. Alvarez's flower shop had a clear view of the intersection from the front window. She'd walked past it 100 times. She told herself maybe it was true. Maybe the woman really had been in the back. But then, the next day, she heard it again. This time, it was Gus, the mechanic who ran the garage 2 doors down from the accident. He was in the diner for his usual Wednesday lunch, and when one of the other customers asked him about the accident, Gus shook his head and said, "Wish I could help. Had my head under a hood the whole time. Didn't see nothing till the ambulance showed up." Maria felt something cold settle in her chest. Gus's garage bay faced the street. She'd seen him standing right there, wiping his hands on a rag, more times than she could count. And then came the neighbor. Mr. Hutchins, who lived 2 houses down from where the accident happened, told a police officer he'd been inside watching television and hadn't heard a thing, not even the screech of tires. Maria learned this from Elena Reyes herself, who came into the diner looking pale and hollowed out, clutching her purse like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "They're saying nobody saw anything," Elena whispered to Maria over the counter, her voice cracking. "Nobody but you." Maria stood there with the coffee pot still in her hand, feeling the weight of those words settle over her like a heavy blanket. 3 witnesses. 3 people who lived and worked right there on that street, who surely must have seen or heard something. And all 3 of them, one by one, had gone quiet. She thought about Sheriff Collins' slow pen, the way his eyes hadn't quite met hers when he asked if anyone else had seen it happen. Maria set the coffee pot down, her hands trembling. She was alone in this. The morning air was cool when Maria walked into the Blue Plate diner, tying her apron around her waist the way she'd done 1,000 times before. The smell of bacon and coffee usually made her feel calm. Today it didn't. Mr. Aldridge was standing by the register, wiping down the same spot on the counter over and over, even though it was already clean. He was a small man with thinning hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down his nose. Maria had worked for him for 3 years. She'd never seen him look so nervous. "Morning, Mr. Aldridge," she said, grabbing a rag to start wiping down the tables. "Maria," he said her name like it cost him something. "Can I talk to you for a second? Before we open?" She set the rag down. "Sure." He glanced toward the door, like he was checking to make sure no one was coming in. Then, he lowered his voice. "I heard about what happened." "With the police. Your statement." Maria felt her stomach tighten. "Yeah, I told them what I saw. Right, of course you did." He wiped his hands on his apron, even though they weren't dirty. "Look, Maria. I'm not telling you what to do. I want you to know that. It's your business. But I've been in this town a long time, and I know how things work around here." "What do you mean?" Mr. Aldridge lowered his voice even more, so it was barely above a whisper. "Frank Whitfield. He's got friends. On the town council. And Sheriff Collins, they go way back, been hunting buddies for 20 years. I'm just saying, maybe you could reconsider your statement. Say you're not so sure what you saw. Say it was dark. You were tired. Nobody would blame you." Maria stared at him. Her chest felt tight. "You're asking me to lie?" "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm just saying be careful. That's all. This town takes care of its own, and Frank Whitfield built half the buildings on Main Street. People depend on him. His trucking company, that's a lot of jobs around here. You understand what I'm saying? Maria didn't answer right away. She thought about Danny Reyes lying on the pavement, his bike twisted beside him. She thought about Elena's hollow eyes. I saw what I saw, she said quietly. I'm not taking it back. Mr. Aldridge's shoulders sagged, like he'd expected that answer but hoped for a different one. All right, he said. All right, just be careful, Maria. That's all I'm asking. He walked into the back kitchen without another word, leaving Maria standing there with her rag in her hand and a knot in her stomach that didn't go away for the rest of the day. The shift dragged on. Customers came and went. Plates clattered. Coffee poured. Maria smiled when she needed to smile and nodded when she needed to nod, but her mind kept circling back to Mr. Aldridge's words. Friends on the council. Hunting buddies. She thought about Sheriff Collins's slow pen again, the way it had hesitated over the license plate number. By the time her shift ended, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Maria untied her apron, said goodnight to the night cook, and stepped out into the parking lot behind the diner. Her car sat alone under the flickering lamppost, the only vehicle left. She dug her keys out of her purse, her mind still tangled in thoughts of Whitfield and the sheriff and Mr. Aldridge's nervous eyes. She reached for the door handle when something caught her eye. A piece of paper, tucked under the windshield wiper, fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. Her hand froze. She reached out slowly and pulled it free. The paper was plain, folded once. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. Block letters, written in thick black marker. Mind your own business. Maria's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked around the empty parking lot, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Nothing moved. No one was there. But the feeling of being watched crawled up her spine like ice water. She got into her car quickly, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Then she started the engine and pulled out of the lot, checking her rearview mirror again and again the whole way home, her hands shaking against the wheel. 2 nights later, Maria stood in Sophia's doorway and watched her daughter's chest rise and fall in the soft glow of the nightlight. Sophia's stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye, was tucked under her chin the way it always was. Maria pulled the blanket up a little higher, even though the night was warm. "Love you, baby girl," she whispered. Sophia stirred, but didn't wake. "Love you too, Mommy," she mumbled, half asleep, the words slurring together. Maria stood there a moment longer, just watching. There was something about seeing Sophia asleep that always calmed her down, like the world could be falling apart outside these 4 walls, but in here, everything was still safe. Still good. She closed the door most of the way, leaving a small crack the way Sophia liked, and walked down the narrow hallway to the kitchen. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old clock above the stove. She filled the kettle and set it on the burner, then sat down at the small table, the same one she'd bought secondhand 3 years ago when she and Sophia first moved in. The papers from the courthouse sat in front of her, right where she'd left them that morning. A hearing date, typed in plain black letters. Her name printed next to a line where she was supposed to sign, confirming she would testify. She stared at the paper like it might change if she looked at it long enough. The kettle began to whistle, and Maria got up to pour the water over a tea bag, wrapping her hands around the warm mug when she sat back down. The steam curled up into the air between her and the papers. "What do I do?" she whispered to no one. She thought about Mr. Aldridge's nervous hands wiping the same clean spot on the counter. She thought about the note under her windshield wiper, the block letters still burned into her mind. "Mind your own business." She thought about Danny Reyes and the way his mother's eyes had looked so empty and scared. And she thought about Sophia, asleep just down the hall, trusting that her mother would keep her safe no matter what. Maria pressed her palms against her eyes and took a long breath. She didn't know if she was brave or just stubborn. Maybe there wasn't a difference. She picked up the pen sitting next to the papers and held it over the signature line, her hand hovering there, not quite touching down. That was when the window exploded. The sound was enormous, a crash of glass and something heavy hitting the wall, and for one frozen second Maria didn't move at all, her brain refusing to understand what had just happened. Then, she was on her feet, the chair clattering backward onto the floor, her heart slamming so hard it hurt. Sophia. She was running before she even knew her legs were moving, down the hallway. Glass crunching under her bare feet in the front room, where the curtain hung torn and swaying, a brick lying on the carpet just feet from where it had smashed through. She didn't stop to look at it. She burst into Sophia's room and found her daughter sitting up in bed, eyes wide and terrified, too scared even to cry. "Mommy." "What happened? What was that?" "It's okay, baby. It's okay." Maria scooped her up, blanket and stuffed rabbit and all, holding her so tight Sophia gasped. "Mommy's got you. Mommy's got you." She carried Sophia into the bathroom, the only room without a window, and sat on the edge of the tub rocking her, whispering that everything was fine even though her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She called 911 and then the sheriff's office directly, her voice cracking as she explained what happened, gave her address, begged someone to come. "We'll send someone when we can," the voice on the other end said, flat and bored. "Might be a while. Busy night." Nobody came. The next morning, after a night of no sleep, Maria dragged herself into the diner because she didn't know what else to do. She tied her apron with trembling fingers, made it through the breakfast rush on autopilot, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But when the rush died down, she slipped into the back kitchen, leaned against the steel counter, and finally let herself fall apart. Her shoulders shook. Tears streamed down her face, and quiet sobs escaped before she could stop them. She didn't see Duke standing just outside the doorway, still as stone, his coffee growing cold in his hand, every word she'd cried out already sinking deep into him. Duke didn't move for a long moment. He stood just outside the kitchen doorway, his boots planted on the worn linoleum, listening to Maria's sobs come in broken waves. His coffee had gone cold in his hand, but he didn't notice. Something in his chest had gone tight and hard, like a fist closing around a stone. He'd heard the whole thing. Maria hadn't seen him there, and neither had Rosa, the other waitress, who'd wrapped an arm around Maria's shoulders and was murmuring something soft and useless about how things would get better. Duke had caught every word Maria said between the sobs. The brick. The sound of the glass shattering. Sophia's scared little voice asking what happened. The sheriff's office telling her nobody was coming. Duke's jaw tightened. He'd seen men in prison yards with softer eyes than the ones he had right now. He turned without a sound and walked back to his stool at the counter, the same one he always sat on, third from the end, worn smooth by a year of Tuesdays and Thursdays. He set his cup down carefully, like it might break if he wasn't gentle with it. Then, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded bill, and set it on the counter next to the cup. He didn't wait for change. He never did. He stood, the stool creaking under his weight as it always did, and walked toward the door. His boots were heavy on the tile, steady, unhurried, but there was something different in the way he carried himself now, a stiffness in his shoulders, a set to his jaw that hadn't been there when he walked in. Nobody said anything to him. Nobody ever did. That was fine by Duke. Words weren't his strong suit anyway. He'd let his actions speak, same as he always had. Outside, the morning sun was bright and unbothered, like it didn't know what kind of night Maria had just lived through. Duke swung his leg over his motorcycle, the big Harley gleaming black and silver in the light, and sat there for a second before he started the engine. His hands, thick and scarred from years of work and worse, gripped the handlebars tight. He thought about his sister Angela. 20 years now, and he could still see her face, clear as day. He'd been the one who found out the truth about what really happened, and it hadn't mattered one bit, because nobody with any power wanted to hear it. He'd carried that failure a long time, like a stone in his gut that never quite wore down. He wasn't going to carry another one. The engine roared to life, and Duke pulled out of the lot, riding not toward his usual route home, but toward the clubhouse, where Preacher would be sitting on the porch with his Bible and his coffee, same as every morning. That night, Maria sat in her living room with the boarded-up window casting strange shadows across the floor. She'd nailed a piece of plywood over the broken glass herself, her hands still trembling as she worked, Sophia watching from the couch with the stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Maria checked the locks 3 times before bed. She checked Sophia's window twice more after that. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for another sound, another crash, another reason to be afraid. Around midnight, unable to sleep, she got up and peered through the small gap at the edge of the plywood, out into the dark street. A motorcycle sat parked directly across from her house. She recognized it right away. Duke's bike, the one she'd seen outside the diner every Tuesday and Thursday for the better part of a year. Duke himself sat astride it, arms crossed, still as a statue, watching her house like he had nowhere else in the world to be. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to feel afraid or grateful. She stood there a long time, just watching him watch her house, the porch light catching the silver in his beard. By 2 a.m, when she checked again, there were 7 bikes lined up along the street. Engines quiet, a row of leather-clad shapes sitting like sentries in the dark. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved much at all. They just sat there, an unofficial wall between her home and whatever might come next. For the first time in a week, Maria climbed back into bed and slept the whole night through. The morning light was soft and gray when Maria opened her front door. The air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. She pulled her cardigan tight around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, and there he was. Duke stood by his bike, one boot propped on the curb, arms crossed over his chest like he'd been standing there for hours. Maybe he had. The other bikes were gone now, the street quiet except for a few birds fussing in the maple tree at the edge of her yard. But Duke had stayed. Maria walked down the steps slowly, her arms wrapped around herself. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his beard, the quiet weight he carried in his shoulders. "You were here all night," she said. It wasn't a question. Duke shrugged, like it was nothing. Slept in shifts. Preacher took over around 4. Maria shook her head, still trying to understand it. Why? Duke didn't answer right away. He looked past her, toward the boarded-up window, then back at her face. "I heard you crying yesterday." "In the kitchen." His voice was low, rough like gravel under boots. Wasn't trying to listen. Just did. Maria felt her cheeks warm, embarrassed that he'd heard her at her worst. "I didn't know anyone was there, I know." He shifted his weight. Uncomfortable, like talking this much cost him something. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't." Maria took a step closer. "Duke, I don't even know you." "Not really. You come in twice a week, you drink your coffee, you don't say much. And now you're out here all night, protecting me and Sophia, like we're family." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Duke looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, something old and heavy that Maria couldn't name. "You're not a stranger," he said finally. "You're the only one in this whole town who stood up and told the truth when everybody else went quiet." He paused, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't often say out loud. "That matters. More than you know." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "It cost me a window, almost cost me my daughter's safety." "I know." Duke's voice hardened just slightly. "That's why I'm here." She studied him, this big, rough man with scars on his knuckles and sorrow tucked behind his eyes, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safety exactly, something steadier than that. Like maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I mean it. Thank you." Duke gave a small nod, like the words embarrassed him more than they should have. He pushed off from his bike and swung his leg over it, the leather creaking under him. "Nobody should stand alone when they're doing right," he said, and started the engine. Maria stood on the sidewalk and watched him ride off down the quiet street, the sound of the engine fading into the morning air, until she couldn't hear it anymore. She went back inside, made Sophia breakfast, got her off to school, and for a few hours she let herself believe that maybe things were turning a corner. She went about her day with a lightness she hadn't felt in over a week, humming to herself as she folded laundry, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like she could breathe. The phone rang a little after 2 in the afternoon, while Maria was scrubbing dishes at the sink. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked it up, expecting maybe the diner, or Rosa checking in. Instead, a clipped, professional voice introduced herself as a lawyer representing Whitfield Trucking. Maria's stomach dropped before the woman even finished her sentence. "I'm calling to inform you," the lawyer said, her tone crisp and cold, "that a concern has been raised with Child Protective Services regarding the fitness of your home environment. Specifically, your work hours and the amount of time your daughter spends unsupervised." Maria's hand tightened around the phone. The room seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. "There will be a formal inquiry," the lawyer continued. "You'll be contacted soon with more details." The line went dead. Maria stood there, the dial tone humming in her ear, the dish towel slipping from her fingers to the floor. The kitchen table had never felt so small. Maria sat with her hands folded in front of her, trying to keep them from shaking, while Miss Patterson flipped through a folder of papers like she was reading a grocery list instead of picking apart a family's life. Miss Patterson was a thin woman with tired eyes and a gray cardigan buttoned all the way to her collar. She had a clipboard, a pen that clicked when she thought, and a voice that never seemed to change no matter what she said. "So you work at the Blue Plate Diner," she said, clicking her pen. "How many hours a week?" 50, sometimes 60 when Rosa needs help. Maria kept her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding so hard she thought Miss Patterson might hear it. "I pick up extra shifts because the tips help. It's just me and Sophia. And during those hours, who watches your daughter? My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, watches her after school most days. On the nights I close, my friend Rosa's daughter comes by to help with homework and dinner." Maria's voice caught slightly. "Sophia's never alone." "Never, miss." Patterson wrote something down without looking up. "We've received a report expressing concern that your daughter spends excessive time in the care of others due to your work schedule. There's also a note here about instability, threats made against your home." Maria's stomach turned to ice. "Someone threw a brick through my window." "Because I told the truth about what I saw happen to Danny Reyes. That's not instability. That's somebody trying to scare me into silence." "I understand that's your perspective." Miss Patterson's tone didn't shift at all. "But from a child welfare standpoint, we have to consider the safety of the home environment, regardless of the reason behind it." From the next room, Maria could hear Sophia playing with her dolls. But the sound was too quiet, too careful. Sophia wasn't playing, she was listening. "Can I see her room?" "Miss," Patterson asked, already standing. Maria led her down the hall, forcing her feet to move, even though every part of her wanted to scream that this wasn't fair, that she had done nothing wrong except tell the truth when no one else would. Sophia's room was small, but tidy, stuffed animals lined up on the bed. A nightlight shaped like a moon plugged into the wall. Ms. Patterson looked around, jotted a few more notes, and peeked into the closet like she expected to find something hidden there. Sophia stood in the doorway, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest, her dark eyes wide, and searching Maria's face for some kind of reassurance. "It's okay, baby," Maria said softly, though her voice trembled on the last word. They went back to the kitchen. Miss Patterson asked more questions about Sophia's father, about Maria's income, about whether there had ever been any incidents at home. Maria answered every one, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Finally, Miss Patterson closed her folder and stood. "We'll be in touch," she said, the same flat tone she'd used the entire visit. "A follow-up visit may be necessary. In the meantime, try to make arrangements so your daughter isn't spending so many hours away from you. That would help your case." "My case," Maria repeated quietly, like the words tasted bitter. Ms. Patterson gave a small nod, gathered her things, and let herself out the front door. Maria stood frozen in the kitchen until she heard the car pull away from the curb, and only then did her legs give out beneath her. She sank into the kitchen chair, her whole body trembling, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Sophia crept into the kitchen, still holding her rabbit. "Mommy? Was that lady mad at us?" "No, baby," Maria whispered, pulling her daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. No one's mad. Go watch your show. Okay? I'll be right there. Sophia hesitated, then padded off toward the living room, throwing one last worried glance over her shoulder. The second she was gone, Maria grabbed her phone off the counter, her fingers fumbling as she scrolled to Duke's number, the one he'd given her only days ago in case of an emergency. Her thumb hovered over the call button for only a second before she pressed it. He picked up on the second ring. "Maria?" "Duke," she said, her voice breaking. "Can you meet me at the diner? I need to talk to you. Please." The Blue Plate diner was dark, except for the light over the back booth, the one Rosa always left on for closing. Maria had let herself in with her own key, flipping the sign to closed even though it already was, just to feel like the door was really shut against the world. Duke showed up 10 minutes later. She heard his bike before she saw him, that low rumble that used to scare her and now, somehow, sounded like safety. He walked in wearing his leather jacket, his gray hair pulled back, his face unreadable as always. He didn't say anything at first. He just slid into the booth across from her and waited. Maria had made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, but hers sat untouched, going cold between her hands. Her fingers wrapped around the mug so tight her knuckles had gone pale again, same as they had at her kitchen table an hour before. "CPs came today," she said, her voice flat, like she was still in shock. "A woman named Miss Patterson. She asked about my work hours. About Sophia, about the brick through the window." Maria let out a breath that shook on the way out. She looked in Sophia's closet, Duke, like she thought I was hiding something. Duke's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything yet. He let her keep talking. "They're saying my home isn't stable. That working 60 hours a week means I'm not around enough. That the threats against us are proof my life is chaotic." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only pain. Like it's my fault someone threw a brick through my window. Like I asked for any of this. "You didn't," Duke said quietly. His voice was low and steady, the same voice he used every Tuesday and Thursday when he ordered his coffee, black, no sugar. But there was something different underneath it now. Something rougher. "If they take her," Maria whispered, and her voice cracked wide open on the last word, "I don't know what I'll do. She's all I have. She's all that matters." Duke reached across the table, not touching her, just resting his hand near hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "They're not taking her," he said. "Not while I'm still breathing." Maria looked up at him, and something in his face had changed. He wasn't looking at her like a woman he'd promised to protect out of duty anymore. He was looking at her like someone who understood exactly what was at stake, in a way that went deeper than words. "Duke," she said softly, "why does this matter so much to you? You didn't know me a year ago. You barely said 10 words to me before all this happened. Why are you doing all this?" For a long moment, Duke didn't answer. He looked down at his coffee, turning the mug slowly in a circle on the table, like he was working up the courage to say something he'd kept locked away for a long time. "I had a sister," he finally said. "Angela. She was 17 when she died. 20 years ago now." His voice was quiet, but every word landed heavy, like stones dropped into still water. "Car accident. Except it wasn't really an accident. The Delacroix family ran the biggest business in my hometown back then, kind of like Whitfield runs things here. Their son was driving drunk that night. Angela never had a chance." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She didn't say anything. she just listened. There was a witness, Duke went on. A gas station clerk who saw the whole thing. But the Delacroix family had money, and money talks in small towns. They paid off the sheriff, paid off the witness, made it disappear like it never happened. His hands curled into fists on the table, the old anger still living there after 2 decades. Nobody was ever held accountable. Not for Angela, not for anything. He looked up at Maria then, and his eyes were wet, though he didn't let the tears fall. I couldn't save my sister. I couldn't get her justice. But I can help you keep yours. His voice dropped even lower, barely above a whisper. I'm not going to let this town do to you and Sophia what that town did to Angela and me. Not while I'm still standing. The morning sun hadn't fully burned off the fog yet when Duke pulled his bike into the gravel lot behind the garage he used as his own personal shop. The air smelled like diesel and wet pavement. He sat on an old milk crate outside the bay door, phone pressed to his ear, watching a truck rumble by on the highway in the distance. Ray. It's Duke. There was a pause on the other end, then a gravelly laugh. Duke Callahan. Been a while, brother. What, 3 years? Something like that. Duke rubbed a hand over his jaw. He hadn't slept much. Maria's face kept coming back to him, the way her hands had shaken around that coffee cup. I need a favor. Quiet one. Ain't nothing quiet about you, Duke. Ray chuckled again, but his voice sharpened, the way it always did when he sensed business was coming. What do you need? There's a company called Whitfield Trucking. Runs out of a town called Cedar Falls, maybe 2 counties from you. I need to know about their maintenance records, their driver history, anything that looks off. Ray was quiet for a second. Whitfield. Yeah, I've heard the name. Guy's supposed to run a tight operation, real by the book, from what I hear. That's what he wants people to think, Duke said. I think there's rot underneath it. A kid got hit by one of his trucks. Driver didn't stop. And now every log that truck ever kept is probably been touched up nice and clean. You think somebody's cooking the books. I know somebody's cooking the books, Duke said. I just need proof. You still got people at that scale house off Route 9? Inspectors, mechanics, anybody who might have serviced Whitfield rigs? I got a guy, Ray said slowly. Does inspections 2 counties over. He owes me from a while back. I can ask around. Quiet, like you said. Won't spook nobody. I owe you, Ray. You don't owe me nothing, Duke. Not after what you did for my boy back in '06. Ray's voice softened. Just a touch. This about that sister of yours? The one you never talk about? Duke didn't answer right away. He watched a hawk circle over the tree line, wings barely moving, riding some current only it could feel. Something like that, he finally said. I'll call you when I know something, Ray said, and the line went dead. Duke sat there a while longer, turning the phone over in his hands, thinking about Angela, about gas station clerks and sheriffs who looked the other way, about a debt 20 years unpaid that he was finally starting to feel like he could settle, even if it wasn't in the way he'd once imagined. By the time evening came, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, purple and orange bleeding together over the rooftops of Cedar Falls. Duke rode up to Maria's house with Preacher following close behind on his own bike, the engine noise softer, more like a low hum than Duke's rumble. Preacher was in his 60s, with a white beard that made him look like he belonged more in a church pulpit than on a motorcycle, though somehow he managed both without contradiction. He wore his leather vest over a collared shirt, the patches on it faded from years of sun and rain. Maria opened the door before they even knocked, like she'd been watching from the window. Sophia peeked out from behind her legs, wide-eyed at the sight of two big bikers on her porch. "Come in," Maria said, stepping aside. They sat around her small kitchen table, the same one where she'd probably cried 100 times that week alone. Preacher folded his hands in front of him, his voice calm and warm when he spoke. "Maria, I know things feel like they're falling apart right now. But you're gonna need someone in your corner who knows the law better than we do. Someone who can go toe-to-toe with Whitfield's lawyers." "I don't have money for a lawyer," Maria said quietly. "Not one who could stand up to somebody like Whitfield." "You don't need money," Preacher said. "You need the right person. There's a woman named Diane Ferris. She's a lawyer, does pro bono work for folks like you. Whistleblower cases, mostly, people who spoke up and got punished for it." He looked at Duke, then back at Maria. "I've known her for years. She's tough. Honest, she won't back down easy." Duke nodded slowly. "If anyone can help you keep Sophia and take Whitfield down at the same time, it's her." The drive to Millbrook took 40 minutes. Maria sat in the passenger seat of Duke's old pickup truck, the one he used when he wasn't on his bike, watching the fields roll by outside the window. Sophia was at school. Maria had the day off, though it didn't feel like a day off. It felt like walking toward something with her stomach in knots. "You okay?" Duke asked, glancing over. "No," Maria said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Duke almost smiled at that. That's usually how it works. Diane Ferris's office sat above a hardware store on Millbrook's main street, up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The waiting room was small, just 2 chairs and a table with old magazines, but the woman who greeted them at the door had sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Maria Torres?" Diane asked, extending a hand. She was maybe 50, with gray streaking through dark hair pulled back tight, and a blazer that looked like it had seen 100 courtrooms. "Preacher told me you'd be coming, and you must be Duke." Duke nodded, not saying much, the way he usually didn't. They sat in Diane's office, a cramped room with law books stacked on every surface and a window that looked out over the street below. Diane pulled out a legal pad and clicked her pen. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems small." So Maria did. She talked about the night of the accident, the truck blowing through the stop sign, Danny's small body on the pavement. She talked about giving her statement to the police and how the days after felt like watching a door slowly close on her. The shop owner who suddenly couldn't remember anything. The mechanic who wouldn't meet her eyes anymore. The notes on her car. The brick through her window with Sophia asleep inside. Her voice shook when she got to that part. Duke sat beside her, quiet, steady, like a wall she could lean against without asking. "And now they're going after your custody," Diane said, writing quickly. "Using your work hours as evidence you're an unfit mother." "They want to scare me into dropping everything," Maria said. "And it's working. Some days I think maybe I should just stop. Just let it go, like everyone keeps telling me to." Diane looked up from her pad. "But you haven't." "No," Maria said. "I keep thinking about that little boy. Danny, if I stay quiet, nobody ever answers for what happened to him. And I keep thinking about my daughter. What kind of example am I setting if I teach her that the truth doesn't matter if it's inconvenient?" Diane set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, studying Maria for a long moment. You know, I've had a lot of clients over the years. Most of them come in here scared. And that's normal. But some of them, underneath the fear, there's something else, a kind of stubbornness that doesn't bend, even when it probably should for their own good. She smiled faintly. You've got that. Does that mean you'll help me? Maria asked, hardly daring to hope. It means I already know I'm going to take this case, Diane said. Your testimony alone is strong. You're clear, consistent, and you never wavered even under pressure. That matters a great deal in front of a judge. But if we can find any other evidence, anything that corroborates what you saw, we could not just defend you. We could take Whitfield's whole operation apart. Duke spoke up then, his voice low. I've got people looking into their maintenance records, truckers, mechanics, folks who might know things. Diane raised an eyebrow at him, clearly filing that away. Good. Keep that quiet for now. But let me know the moment you find anything solid. She turned back to Maria. As for the C-piece situation, that stops now. I'll file paperwork this week formally entering as your legal counsel. Once they see you have real representation, someone who knows how to expose a retaliatory claim for what it is, they'll back off fast. Whitfield's lawyers were counting on you being alone and scared. You're not alone anymore. Maria felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been tight for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. The drive home that evening was quieter than the drive there. But it was a different kind of quiet. Maria watched the sun sink behind the hills, gold light spilling across the fields, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself believe things might actually turn out okay. Duke showed up on Monday with a toolbox that looked older than Sophia's whole life. The metal was dented and scratched, covered in stickers from places Maria had never heard of, half peeled off from years of wear. Chains rusted, he said, kneeling next to Sophia's bike in the driveway. The pink paint was chipped on the frame, and one of the handlebar streamers had come loose, hanging by a thread. Probably needs oil more than anything. Can you fix it? Sophia asked, standing close, watching his hands with the kind of focus only kids have. Give me a few days, Duke said. Gotta do it right. That became the pattern. Every evening that week, Duke's truck rolled up around 6, right as the sun started turning orange over the rooftops. He'd pull out his toolbox and set to work in the driveway, while Maria stood at the kitchen window, chopping vegetables or stirring a pot, watching him through the glass. He never said much. That was just Duke's way. But Sophia didn't seem to mind the quiet. She'd sit cross-legged on the concrete beside him, chattering about her day at school, about the girl in her class who ate paste, about the drawing she made of a dog that looked more like a cloud with legs. Duke would nod along, grunting in the right places, his big rough hands working slow and careful on the bike chain. You're doing it wrong, Sophia told him on Wednesday, peering over his shoulder. Yeah? Duke didn't look up. How's that? You gotta wipe the oil off after. My teacher says grease gets everywhere if you don't. Duke almost smiled. Your teacher sounds smart. She is. She has a hamster named Mr. Biscuit, that's so. Maria watched this from the window, a soft ache in her chest she couldn't quite name. She'd seen Duke stand guard outside her house at night, seen him sit stone-faced across from Diane Ferris, talking about falsified records and legal strategy. But this Duke, the one kneeling in her driveway letting a 6-year-old boss him around about bicycle maintenance, was someone different. Someone she hadn't expected. By Thursday, the chain still wasn't fixed, though Maria suspected it had less to do with the difficulty of the job and more to do with Duke taking his time. He seemed to like being there. He seemed to need somewhere to be. "Dinner's ready," Maria called from the door that evening, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You want to stay, Duke?" "I made enough." Duke looked up, surprised, like the offer caught him off guard every single time she made it, even though this was the 4th night in a row. "You don't have to keep asking," she said, smiling. "The answer's always going to be yes if you let it." He wiped his hands on a rag and followed them inside, sitting at the small kitchen table like he'd done it 100 times before, even though it had only been a few days. Sophia chattered through dinner about everything and nothing, and Duke listened. Really listened, the way most grown-ups forgot how to do. After they ate, Sophia ran to grab her bike from the driveway, dragging it halfway into the kitchen, despite Maria telling her not to bring it inside. "Look, Uncle Duke fixed the streamer too," she said, holding up the handlebar. The word hung in the air for a moment. Sophia didn't seem to notice what she'd said, too busy admiring the new streamer, but Maria's eyes went straight to Duke's face. He'd gone still, like something had caught him off guard. Sophia looked up then, seeming to realize what had slipped out. "Is that okay?" she asked, suddenly shy in a way she rarely was. "Calling you Uncle Duke?" "You're always here, and Mommy says family isn't just people you're born to. It's people who show up." Duke was quiet for a long moment. Maria watched him swallow hard, his jaw working like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come easy. "Yeah," he finally said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yeah, kid, that's okay." Sophia beamed and threw her arms around his middle in a quick, fierce hug before running off to put her bike away, leaving Duke sitting there at the table, looking like a man who hadn't expected to feel this way again. Maria didn't say anything. She just watched him, seeing something shift behind his eyes, something that had been closed off for a long, long time finally cracking open. The news broke on a Friday morning, spreading through Cedar Falls the way news in small towns always does, faster than anyone could stop it, passed from porch to porch, register to register, phone call to phone call. Maria heard about it from Rosa, one of the other waitresses at the Blue Plate, who came in for her shift already talking before she'd even taken off her coat. "Did you see the paper?" Rosa asked, breathless, dropping the Cedar Falls Gazette on the counter in front of Maria. The Reyes family. They talked. They actually talked. Maria's hands stilled on the coffee pot she'd been filling. She set it down slow and picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the front page. There was a photo of Danny Reyes, thinner than Maria remembered, sitting up in a wheelchair on his family's front porch, a blanket over his lap despite the warm weather. Beside him sat his mother, Elena, her hand resting on her son's shoulder, and his father, Miguel, standing behind them both like a man keeping guard. The headline read, "Reyes family breaks silence. Our son is alive because someone was brave enough to speak." Maria's throat tightened as she read the article. Elena talked about the accident, about the terror of that night, about watching her son's bike crumple under the weight of a truck that never even slowed down. She talked about the months of fear that followed, about the whispers telling her family to stay quiet, to not make trouble with a family as powerful as the Whitfields. "We were scared," Elena had told the reporter. "We were so scared." But then, we heard about Maria Torres. A woman with nothing. No power, no money, no family behind her. Standing up anyway. And we thought, if she can do that for a stranger's son, what kind of people are we if we stay silent about our own? Maria had to set the paper down. Her eyes stung, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, trying to hold herself together behind the counter. "You okay?" Rosa asked gently. Maria nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. She felt too many things at once: relief, gratitude, a strange, humbling kind of shame that her simple act of telling the truth had cost the Reyes family so much fear before they found the courage to add their voice to hers. The diner filled up as the morning went on, busier than usual, and Maria noticed something different in the air. People who used to look away when she walked past their tables now met her eyes. A few even nodded at her, small, careful nods, like they were testing the water. Old Mrs. Petrovsky, who'd been coming to the diner every Sunday for as long as Maria had worked there, caught her arm gently as she passed with a coffee pot. "I should have said something back then," the old woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw that truck too. I was scared, and I let my fear make the choice for me. I'm sorry, dear. Truly sorry." Maria didn't know what to say, so she just squeezed the old woman's hand and moved on, her chest tight with something she couldn't quite name. It kept happening throughout the day. A quiet word here, an apologetic glance there. Even Danny's old bus driver stopped in for lunch and told Maria, in a low voice, that he wished he'd spoken up sooner. Then, near the end of her shift, the bell above the door jingled, and Mr. Aldridge walked in. He was the owner of the hardware store 2 blocks down, a heavyset man with thinning gray hair, whom Maria had always found a little gruff, a little distant. He'd been one of the first people to tell her, gently but firmly, to let the whole thing go. He sat at the counter and waited until Maria came over before he spoke. "I was scared," he said plainly, not bothering with small talk first. "Whitfield's done business with half this town for 20 years. I didn't want trouble." Maria waited, unsure where this was going. "But I was wrong, mister," Aldridge continued, meeting her eyes. "You didn't have half of what I had to lose, and you still did the right thing. I want you to know, if you need someone to speak up, someone the council might actually listen to, I'll do it. I should have done it a long time ago." Maria stood there, gripping the coffee pot so tight her knuckles turned pale, overwhelmed by a gratitude she hadn't expected and didn't quite know how to hold. Duke was in the garage, elbow deep in the engine of an old pickup, when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag before he picked it up. The screen said Ray. Ray was an old road contact, a trucker Duke had known for almost 20 years, back from the days when Duke still hauled freight himself before the club became his whole life. Ray owed him a favor from a long time ago, the kind of favor men like them didn't forget. "Callahan," Duke said, phone pressed to his ear. "Duke, it's Ray. I think I found your guy." Duke set the rag down slow. "Talk to me." "Name's Carlos Mendez. Worked for Whitfield Trucking almost 6 years. Mechanic. Word is he got fired back in the spring for refusing to sign off on a maintenance log. Truck had bad brakes, and Whitfield wanted it on the road anyway. Guess which truck?" Duke's jaw tightened. "The one that hit the boy." "That's my guess, too," Ray said. Mendez didn't want to falsify the paperwork, so they let him go. Made up some story about him stealing parts, but everybody who knew him says that's garbage. Man's clean as they come. Where's he now? Moved out of Cedar Falls after he got canned. Living about 2 hours south, little town called Millbrook. Works at a garage there now. I got an address. Figured you'd want it before anybody else did. Duke felt something settle in his chest, heavy and certain. Send it to me. You gonna go talk to him? Somebody's got to. He hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at the engine he'd been working on, though he wasn't really seeing it anymore. He was thinking about Maria, about the way her hands had shook when she told him about the CP's threats, about Sophia asking why Mommy looked so tired all the time. He was thinking about his sister Angela, too, the way he always did when the weight of an old, unfinished debt pressed down on him. He called Preacher next. "Get your boots on," Duke said when Preacher picked up. "We're taking a ride." Millbrook was a small town, smaller even than Cedar Falls, with one main street and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed its sign since the 70s. Duke and Preacher rode in on their bikes, engines rumbling low through the quiet streets, drawing a few stares from folks who weren't used to seeing men like them. They found Carlos at the garage Ray had mentioned, a lean man in his 30s with tired eyes and grease-stained hands, the kind of tired that came from more than just hard work. When Duke introduced himself and mentioned Cedar Falls, Carlos went still, his face draining of color. "I don't want trouble," Carlos said quietly, glancing around like he expected someone to be watching. "We're not trouble," Preacher said, his voice calm and steady. "We just want to talk. That's all." They ended up at the diner down the street. The three of them crowded into a corner booth with cups of coffee going cold between them. Carlos didn't say much at first. He stared at the table, turning his coffee cup slowly in circles. "I knew that truck wasn't safe," he finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "Brakes were shot. I told them. They told me to sign off anyway, said it was just paperwork, that the truck would get fixed next week. I said no. Next thing I know, I'm fired for stealing parts I never touched." "You didn't do anything wrong," Duke said. "Feels like I did," Carlos said, his eyes finally lifting to meet Duke's. "That little boy almost died. And I knew. And I didn't do anything after they fired me. I just left town. I was scared of what Whitfield could do to me." Duke leaned forward, his voice low and rough with something Carlos hadn't expected from a man who looked like him. "I had a sister once. Died in an accident that got covered up by people just like Whitfield. Nobody ever answered for it. I've carried that for 20 years, Carlos. I'm not going to let it happen again if I can help it." Preacher spoke next, gentle but firm. "There's a woman back in Cedar Falls named Maria. She's fighting this fight alone, and it's about to cost her everything, including her daughter. You've got the piece that could change all of it." Carlos was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped tight around his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier than before. "Tell me what you need me to do." The town square had never looked like this before. Maria stood near the front of the crowd, Sophia's small hand wrapped tight in hers, and looked out at more candles than she could count. They flickered in the cool evening air, held by people she'd known her whole life. People who, just weeks ago, wouldn't meet her eyes at the grocery store. Now they were all here, for Danny. The old gazebo in the center of the square had been strung with white lights. Someone had set up a small speaker system, and folding chairs had been arranged in rows, though most people stood, candles cupped in their hands to keep the flames from the wind. Maria recognized faces from the diner, from church, from Sophia's school. Even Mr. Patterson, who owned the hardware store and had barely nodded at her since the accident, stood near the back with a candle of his own. Duke stood beside her, solid and quiet as always, his leather vest catching the glow of 100 small flames. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but he'd stayed close, the way he always did now, like a shadow that had become a comfort instead of something to fear. Danny's mother, Elena Reyes, stepped up to the small platform in front of the gazebo. She was a thin woman with dark circles under her eyes that hadn't faded in weeks, but tonight there was something different in her face. Something that looked almost like hope. 6 weeks ago, Elena said, her voice shaking but clear, I didn't know if my son would wake up. The doctors didn't make any promises. I sat by his bed every night and I prayed, and some nights I didn't think anyone was listening. She paused, looking out over the crowd, over all the candles glowing like small stars come down to earth. But Danny's getting stronger every day. He's talking now. He asked about his bike last week. A soft, broken laugh escaped her. He wanted to know if it was fixed. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the crowd, warm and relieved. I want to say something else, Elena continued, her eyes finding Maria's across the square. For a long time, I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I spoke up, if I said what I really thought about how my son got hurt. I stayed quiet because everyone else did. But there was one person in this town who didn't stay quiet, who stood up when nobody else would. Maria felt her throat tighten. Sophia squeezed her hand. Maria Torres saw what happened to my son, and she didn't look away. She didn't stay silent, even when it cost her. Even when people slashed her tires and threw a brick through her window. Elena's voice cracked, but she pushed through. Because of her, I found the courage to speak too. Because of her, this town is finally waking up. Maria felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Sophia looked up at her, worried, but Maria squeezed her hand back and gave her a small, wet smile. So tonight, Elena said, holding up her candle, we light these for Danny, but we also light them for courage. For the kind of courage that reminds us who we want to be. The crowd raised their candles together, a sea of small flames trembling against the dark sky. Maria felt Duke's hand settle briefly on her shoulder, steady and warm, and when she looked up at him, his eyes were shining too, though he'd never admit it. All around her, people were nodding, some crying, some reaching out to touch her arm as they passed. Mrs. Patterson from the hardware store came up and hugged her without a word. The mechanic who'd claimed he saw nothing the night of the accident caught her eye and looked away, ashamed. But he was there. He'd come. For the first time since that night on the road, Maria didn't feel like the whole town was watching her, waiting for her to fail, wishing she'd just stayed quiet. She felt them standing with her instead of against her, a wall of candlelight and quiet support that made her chest ache with something like relief. Sophia tugged her hand. Mommy, look. Everybody came. I know, baby, Maria whispered. I know. She caught Duke's eye once more, and he gave her the smallest nod, the kind that said more than words ever could. The next morning, Diane Ferris called with news that made Maria sink into her kitchen chair, phone pressed hard against her ear. The CP's case had been formally dropped. Lack of merit, they said. No evidence to support the complaint. Maria hung up the phone and let herself cry, right there at the kitchen table, tears of pure relief streaming down her face while Sophia ate her cereal across from her, none the wiser to just how close they'd come to losing everything. Duke was under an old pickup truck when he heard the car pull into his garage lot. Not a truck. Not a bike, a car, quiet and expensive, the kind that didn't belong in this part of town. He slid out from under the pickup, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, and stood up slow. Two men in suits stood by a black sedan, looking around his garage like it might dirty their shoes. "Help you?" Duke asked, his voice flat. "Mr. Callahan?" The taller one said. He had slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Roger Bell. This is my associate, Mr. Kane. We work for Mr. Whitfield." Duke set down his rag. "Didn't ask who you worked for, asked what you want." The shorter man, Kane, glanced around the garage again, at the tools hanging on the wall, at the old motorcycle parts stacked in the corner. "Nice place you got here. Get to it," Duke said. Bell's smile widened, but it looked more like a stretch than anything real. "Mr. Whitfield is a reasonable man. He understands that sometimes people get caught up in things bigger than themselves. He'd like to make this easier for everyone involved." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick with paper, and set it on the workbench beside Duke's toolbox. "That's $50,000, Bell said. "Cash, no questions, no paperwork. All Mr. Whitfield asks is that you have a talk with Miss Torres, convince her to drop this whole business before the hearing, and maybe keep your friends away from town for a while." Duke looked at the envelope like it was a dead animal somebody had dropped on his bench. "That's it?" Duke said. $50 grand and I just tell her to walk away?" "That's it," Kane said, stepping forward. "Simple as that. Nobody has to get hurt. Nobody has to lose anything. Everybody just moves on." Duke picked up the envelope. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, all those bills pressed together neat and tight. Bell's smile grew a little wider, like he thought this was already over. Then Duke tossed the envelope back onto the bench so hard it slid off the edge and hit the concrete floor, bills spilling out across the oil stains. "Get out of my garage," Duke said. Bell's smile faltered. "Mr. Callahan, I don't think you understand the offer here. I understand it fine," Duke said, stepping closer, his voice low and hard as stone. "You think I'm some dumb biker who'll take a payoff and disappear. You think this is about money. $50,000 is a lot of. I've been building a case against Whitfield Trucking for 6 weeks, Duke said. Talked to truckers who serviced that route. Mechanics who saw the maintenance logs before somebody made them disappear. Got contacts checking garage records in 3 different states right now. You think I'm the one who needs to be bought off?" Bell's face went white. Kane took a step back toward the car. "You tell Whitfield," Duke said, "that I've watched good people get destroyed by men like him before. Watched it happen and couldn't do a damn thing about it. Not this time. This is a mistake," Bell said, his voice tight now, all the smoothness gone out of it. "You have no idea what you're bringing down on yourself. Or your chapter. Get off my property," Duke said, "before I call every brother I got and let them see what kind of men Whitfield sends to do his dirty work." Kane was already in the car. Bell scooped up the scattered bills from the floor, his hands shaking slightly, and backed toward the sedan without another word. The car peeled out of the lot fast, gravel spraying behind it. Duke stood there a long moment, watching the dust settle, his jaw tight. That night, The local news ran a story with a grainy photo of Duke and 3 other bikers standing outside the diner. The headline read, "Motorcycle Gang Accused of Intimidating Local Business Owner." The anchor's voice was grave, talking about threats, about coercion, about a respected trucking company under siege from outlaw bikers with a history of violence. Duke watched it alone in his apartment above the garage, the blue light of the television flickering across his scarred face, and said nothing at all. Maria's phone woke her before her alarm did. It buzzed on the nightstand, over and over, like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. She reached for it with her eyes still half closed, thinking it might be the diner calling about a shift change. Instead, she saw 14 missed calls. 14, her stomach dropped before she even read a single name. She sat up fast, Sophia still sleeping beside her, one small arm flung over a stuffed rabbit. Maria slid out of bed, careful not to wake her, and padded into the kitchen, phone glowing in her hand. The first text was from her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "Did you see the news? Are you okay?" The second was from a diner regular. "Maria, what is going on with those bikers? Call me." She opened her browser with shaking fingers, and there it was, right on the local news homepage, a grainy photo of Duke and 3 other men standing outside the Blue Plate diner. The headline screamed at her in bold black letters, "Motorcycle Gang Accused of Intimidating Local Business Owner." Maria's heart pounded as she read the article. It twisted everything. It made it sound like Duke and his brothers had shown up to threaten Frank Whitfield, like they were the criminals, like Maria was some poor, helpless woman caught in the middle of a biker turf war instead of a mother who had simply told the truth about what she saw. There were quotes from unnamed town officials expressing concern. There was a statement from a Whitfield trucking spokesperson calling it deeply troubling that a respected local business would face coercion from an outlaw motorcycle organization with a documented history of criminal activity. Documented history. As if Duke's only crime wasn't refusing a bribe. Her phone buzzed again. She almost didn't answer it, but she saw the name on the screen. Diane Ferris. "Diane," Maria said, her voice already trembling. "Did you see it? It's not true, none of it. Duke never threatened anybody. He was protecting me. He's been helping build the case, Maria." Diane's voice was tight, careful, the voice of someone choosing each word like it might explode. "I saw it. I've been getting calls all morning too, from the firm, from other partners. But it's a lie," Maria said. "You know it's a lie. Whitfield's people came to Duke's garage and tried to bribe him and he threw them out. That's what happened." "That's the truth." "I believe you," Diane said, and there was something heavy in the way she said it, something that made Maria's stomach twist tighter. "I do, but belief isn't the same as what a headline does to a case 3 days before a hearing." Maria pressed her hand against the kitchen counter, needing something solid to hold on to. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the narrative has shifted," Diane said. "It's not about Whitfield trucking anymore, not in the public eye. It's about bikers intimidating a business owner. That's the story everyone's talking about. And if it comes out that our whistleblower case is tied to that story, tied to an image of coercion, it could poison everything. The judge, the jury pool, all of it." "So drop the story," Maria said, desperate now. "Tell people the truth." "I've tried," Diane said quietly. "Whitfield's PR team got ahead of this fast. Too fast. This wasn't luck, Maria. This was planned." Maria closed her eyes. Sophia's soft breathing drifted from the bedroom, steady and unaware of the storm gathering just beyond her door. The rest of the morning blurred by in phone calls Maria didn't want to take, texts she didn't have the strength to answer. She sent Sophia to school with a kiss and a forced smile, then sat at her kitchen table staring at nothing, waiting for the day to swallow her whole. The call came just after 2 in the afternoon, while Maria was folding laundry, trying to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral. Diane's name lit up the screen again. Maria answered before the first ring even finished. "Maria," Diane said, and this time her voice had none of its usual sharp confidence. It sounded tired. "Regretful, Final. I need to tell you something, and I wish I didn't have to." Maria's hands went still, a shirt half folded in her lap. "The firm has decided we can't move forward representing you," Diane said. "Not with the case tied to this media storm. They're calling it a liability. I fought them, Maria. I want you to know that. I fought as hard as I could." "Diane, please." Maria's voice cracked. "The hearing is in 4 days." "I know," Diane said, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, the silence stretching heavy and hollow between them. "I'm so sorry. I have to withdraw from the case." Duke's motorcycle rumbled up the gravel driveway just as the afternoon sun dropped low behind the trees. Carlos Mendez's house sat at the edge of town, a small place with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged a little in the middle. Duke had been there twice before, both times to talk quiet and careful, both times feeling like he was coaxing a scared animal out of hiding. This time, before he even cut the engine, he saw Carlos standing on the porch with his arms crossed tight over his chest. His face was pale. His eyes were sharp with fear. "You need to leave," Carlos said before Duke had both boots on the ground. Duke stopped where he was, hands raised slightly, palms open. "Carlos, just want to talk." "I saw the news." Carlos's voice shook. "Everybody saw the news, Duke. My neighbors saw it. My sister called me crying, asking if I got mixed up with some biker gang trying to shake down Whitfield Trucking. That's what they're saying. That's what everyone thinks now." "That's not what happened," Duke said, keeping his voice low and even. "You know that's not what happened." "Doesn't matter what happened." Carlos's voice cracked, high and desperate. "It matters what people believe. And right now people believe I'm part of some criminal thing, some conspiracy, some gang shakedown. I got a kid, Duke. I got a job interview next week at a place 2 towns over, and you think they're gonna hire a guy connected to a story like that?" Duke stepped closer, slow, non-threatening. "Carlos, listen to me. None of that is true. I never threatened Whitfield. I never took a dime from him either, when his people tried to hand me one. This is a lie he's spinning because he's scared. Because you and Maria are close to taking him down. I don't care anymore." Carlos backed toward his front door, shaking his head hard. "I got a family to protect. I can't be the guy in the paper standing next to a story about gangs and threats. I can't do it." "You already told the truth once," Duke said, his voice roughening now, something desperate creeping into it that he hated. "You told Diane what happened with those logs. You know Whitfield had you falsify them. You know that truck should have been pulled off the road weeks before it hit that boy. I know what I know." Carlos shouted, and his voice broke apart at the end, raw and frightened. "But I got a family. Duke, I can't lose everything over this. I can't." Duke stood there in the gravel driveway, watching a man he'd started to respect crumble in front of him, fear eating away every bit of resolve Carlos had built these past weeks. He thought of Maria, waiting on that hearing. He thought of Danny Reyes, still recovering. He thought of Angela, 20 years gone, and the silence that had swallowed her story whole. "Please," Duke said, "quieter now. Don't let him win because he's got money and a good lawyer spinning lies. Don't let fear be what decides this." Carlos's hand was already on his front door. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. Sounded like the words cost him something. "I really am. But I gotta protect my family." The door shut. Duke stood there a long moment, staring at the peeling paint, the porch light flickering weak against the coming dusk. That evening, Duke heard the news the way everyone else did. A small paragraph on the local paper's website, quiet compared to the storm of headlines that had come before it. Carlos Mendez, former Whitfield trucking employee, had issued a statement recanting his earlier claims regarding falsified maintenance records. He cited confusion and personal stress, said he'd been mistaken about what he remembered. Duke read it twice on his phone, sitting on his motorcycle outside his garage, the engine long gone cold. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He rode home slow that night, taking the long way through empty back roads, past fields going dark under a heavy sky. The wind cut cold against his face, but he barely felt it. All he felt was the same hollow ache he'd carried for 20 years, the same taste of failure, the same silence where justice should have been. He'd promised himself this time would be different. This time he wouldn't let someone slip away into silence the way Angela had. But here he was again, driving home alone, having failed to hold on to the one thing that might have made it right. The garage was quiet when Duke got back. Just the tick of the engine cooling and the hum of the single bulb over his workbench. He pulled the door shut behind him, letting the dark swallow up most of the room, and stood there a minute like he wasn't sure why his legs had brought him inside at all. Then, he got his old canvas saddlebags down from the shelf and started packing. He didn't think much about what he grabbed. A few shirts. His good boots. The little folding knife his father gave him before he passed. He moved slow and careful, the way a man moves when his hands are busy, but his mind is somewhere else entirely. Somewhere 20 years back on a stretch of road that never stopped haunting him. He didn't hear Preacher come in until the older man's boots scraped against the concrete floor. "Going somewhere?" Preacher asked. His voice was calm, but Duke could hear the question underneath it. The real one. Yeah, Duke didn't look up. He folded a shirt that didn't need folding. Time to move on. Preacher leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, watching. He'd known Duke long enough to know when a man was running from something instead of toward it. Move on to where? Doesn't matter. Duke zipped the bag halfway, then stopped, staring at it like it had answers he needed. Anywhere that isn't here. Because of Carlos. Because of me. Duke's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. I made this worse, Preacher. Whitfield's people put my face on the news, made me and the whole chapter look like thugs shaking down an honest business, and now Carlos is too scared to say what's true. Maria's lawyer walked. The hearing's in shambles. All because I got involved. You got involved because it needed doing. Needed doing don't mean I was the one who should have done it. Duke shoved another shirt into the bag, harder than he needed to. I thought I could help her the way I couldn't help Angela. Turns out I just brought the same kind of trouble down on Maria that got dragged onto my sister all those years back. Different family, same ending. Powerful man wins, truth gets buried, and everybody who tried to stop it gets burned for the trying. Preacher was quiet a moment, letting that hang in the cold garage air. Then he said, "You remember what you told me the day you found out about Angela's case getting closed? The day the sheriff called it an accident and filed it away like it never mattered?" Duke's hand stilled on the bag. "You told me you'd never forgive yourself for not fighting harder, for staying quiet when you should have been loud. You spent 20 years carrying that, Duke, and now you're fixing to do the same thing all over again. Run off quiet. Leave the fight half-fought. Tell yourself it's for the best. This is different." "Is it?" Preacher's voice sharpened. "Just a little. Just enough to cut through. Seems to me it's exactly the same. You're scared you made things worse, so you're gonna disappear before you see how it ends. That's not protecting Maria. That's protecting yourself from watching it fall apart. I'm protecting her from more of this." Duke's voice cracked loud in the small space, echoing off the tools hanging on the wall. "Every day I'm near her and that girl, I'm a target painted on their backs. Whitfield's already using me to poison the whole case. You think it gets better if I stay? You think the hearing goes any smoother with my face plastered next to hers in every headline?" "I think," Preacher said, slow and steady, "that a woman who never once backed down, not when her tires got slashed, not when a brick came through her window with her baby girl asleep inside, deserves a friend who don't run when things get hard. I think Sophia's out there right now wearing a vest with a patch you all gave her, calling you Uncle Duke, and you're fixing to vanish without so much as a word." Duke didn't answer. He zipped the bag the rest of the way, the sound loud and final in the quiet garage. "I already lost this fight once," Duke said finally, quiet now, almost to himself. 20 years ago. I'm not gonna stand here and watch myself lose it twice. Better I go before the hearing. Before I do any more damage." The porch light was out again. Maria hadn't fixed the bulb yet, hadn't had the money or the time, so she and Sophia sat in the soft gray dark, the only light coming from the Ramirez house next door, and the moon hanging low over the oak tree in the yard. The evening air was cool for June, and Maria pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders, though the chill she felt wasn't really from the weather at all. Sophia sat close beside her, her small legs stretched out on the step below, sneakers not quite touching the ground. She had her leather vest on, the little one Duke's chapter had made her. The patch that said Honorary Angel stitched crooked but proud right over her heart. She wore it almost every day now. "Mommy," Sophia said, breaking the quiet. "You're sad again." Maria opened her mouth to say she wasn't, the way mothers do, the automatic lie that comes out before you even think about it. But she stopped herself. Sophia deserved better than that. She'd always deserved better than that. "Yeah, baby," Maria said instead. "I am." Sophia leaned her head against Maria's arm, and Maria wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her daughter's small body against the cold that had settled into her bones since the phone call from Diane that afternoon. Since the news about Carlos. Since everything had started falling apart at once, like a house built on sand finally giving way to the tide. "I keep thinking," Maria said slowly, "that maybe I made a mistake. Fighting so hard. Maybe I should have just kept quiet, like everybody wanted me to. Why? Because look what happened." Maria's voice caught, and she had to stop and swallow before she could keep going. "My lawyer's gone. Carlos is too scared to tell the truth now. And Duke might lose everything because of me. His name, his club, all of it, dragged through the mud on the news because he tried to help us. She shook her head, staring out at the dark yard, at the oak tree swaying gentle in the breeze. I keep asking myself if I did the right thing, or if I just made everything worse. For you. For him. For everybody. Sophia was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that only kids can really do, thinking without any of the noise adults carry around in their heads. Did you tell the truth? Sophia asked finally. Maria blinked. What? Did you tell the truth? Sophia said again, patient, like she was explaining something simple to someone who should already know it. About the truck. About the boy on the bike. Yes, Maria said. I told the truth. Then, you didn't do anything wrong. Maria let out a breath that was half a laugh, half something closer to a sob. It's not that simple, baby. You said it was. Sophia looked up at her, her small face serious in the moonlight, her dark eyes so much like her father's but with none of the coldness he'd left behind. You told me. Remember? You said doing the right thing isn't about winning, Mommy. It's about not being silent. The words hit Maria square in the chest, harder than anything Frank Whitfield's lawyers had thrown at her, harder than the brick through the window or the slashed tires or the whispers in the diner. Because she had said that. She'd said it to Sophia 100 times, in 100 different moments, trying to teach her daughter what kind of person to be in a world that so often rewarded silence over courage. And here was her own daughter, 6 years old, handing the words right back to her when she needed them most. Maria pulled Sophia into a tight hug, pressing her lips to the top of her daughter's head, tears sliding down her face now, warm against the cool night air. You're right, she whispered. You're so right, baby. She sat there a moment longer, holding Sophia, letting the truth of it settle deep into her bones. She hadn't failed. She hadn't lost. Not yet. Not as long as she kept telling the truth, kept refusing to be silent no matter what it cost her. And she wasn't about to let Duke disappear thinking he'd failed either. Maria stood up so fast Sophia nearly toppled sideways on the step. Come on, Maria said, already reaching for her keys on the little table by the door. We need to go see Uncle Duke. Right now, before it's too late. The garage was dark, except for one bare bulb hanging over the workbench, swinging slightly like someone had just walked past it. Maria pulled up in her old Honda, gravel crunching under the tires, and killed the engine. Sophia was asleep in the back seat, her leather vest rising and falling with each breath. Maria looked at her for a long moment, then decided to let her sleep. This wouldn't take long. It couldn't. She found Duke exactly where her gut told her he'd be. He was standing beside his motorcycle, strapping a duffel bag to the back with the kind of careful, practiced movements of a man who'd packed up and left plenty of times before. His leather jacket was already on. A bedroll sat lashed behind the seat. The garage around him looked empty in a way it hadn't before, like he'd spent the whole evening erasing himself from it. Going somewhere? Maria asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Duke didn't turn around right away. He finished tightening a strap, testing it with a tug, before he finally looked at her. His face, usually so still and unreadable, looked tired in a way she'd never seen. Older, like the years had caught up to him all at once. Figured it was time, he said, before I make things worse than I already have. Worse? Maria stepped closer, her sneakers scraping against the concrete floor. "Duke, you didn't make anything worse. Whitfield did that. His lawyers did that. Not you. Doesn't matter whose fault it is." Duke's jaw tightened. He looked away from her, back at the bike, at the road he was clearly already picturing in his mind. Town sees what it sees, a biker showing up, throwing his weight around, and now everybody thinks you got tangled up with criminals. That's on me. I should have known better than to think I could help without dragging you down with me. You didn't drag me anywhere. Maria's voice shook, but she pushed through it. I walked into this on my own, the second I picked up that phone and called 911. You just made sure I didn't have to walk through it alone. Duke shook his head slowly, like he didn't believe her, or maybe like he didn't want to. 20 years ago, I couldn't help my sister. Couldn't get her an ounce of justice, no matter how hard I fought. I thought maybe this time I could do it right. Instead, I just handed Whitfield exactly what he needed to bury you. He let out a breath that sounded like it hurt coming out. Best thing I can do now is disappear before the story blows up any bigger. No. Maria said it flat. Sharp. The word cutting through the dim garage like a blade. That's not the best thing you can do. That's the easiest thing. And you know it. That got him to look at her. You want to talk about doing the right thing? Maria stepped closer still, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion etched deep into the lines around his eyes. My 6-year-old daughter just reminded me tonight that doing right isn't about winning. It's about not staying silent. You taught me that, Duke, not with words, but with every single night you sat outside my house so I could sleep without being scared. Duke's throat moved as he swallowed, but he didn't say anything. You want to run because you're ashamed, Maria said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. Because you think you failed again. Like you failed your sister. But you didn't fail her, and you sure as hell haven't failed me. The only way this actually turns into a failure is if you disappear now and let Whitfield win by making you scared of the truth. She reached out and put her hand on his arm, feeling the tension there, the coiled readiness of a man who'd spent his whole life braced for another blow. I need my friend, Maria said, standing next to me. Not running from me because he's ashamed of something he didn't even do wrong. Duke stood there a long moment, looking at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something in his expression cracked open, some wall he'd built decades ago finally giving way. Okay. He said quietly, okay. I'll stay. The morning came gray and misty, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. Duke stood in the parking lot of Cedar Falls' little television station, a squat brick building with a satellite dish on the roof, and he felt more nervous than he had in years. His hands, thick and scarred from decades of engine work, would not stop moving. He kept flexing them at his sides like he was trying to shake something loose. Preacher stood beside him, arms crossed, calm as still water. You don't have to have the right words, Preacher said. You just have to have true ones. Duke nodded, though his throat felt tight. A young reporter named Kelly Ann met them at the door, clipboard in hand, looking a little nervous herself. She'd been the one to ask for the interview after the story broke wide, after Whitfield's people had painted Duke and his brothers as thugs on every channel in the county. She'd told her producer she wanted to hear his side. Not everyone agreed that was a good idea. But here, they were. They sat him down in a small studio with 2 cameras and a backdrop of a fake bookshelf. The lights were hot on his face. Duke had ridden through blizzards, through fights, through funerals. This felt harder than all of it combined. "We're rolling in 5, Kellyanne said. "Just breathe, Mr. Callahan." When the red light blinked on, she asked her first question gently. "Mr. Callahan, there's been a lot said about you and your motorcycle club these past few days. Some people are calling you dangerous. Others are calling you a hero. Which is it?" Duke looked at the camera, and for a second, he almost stood up and walked out. Instead, he thought of Maria's hand on his arm the night before. He thought of Sophia's little laugh when he'd taught her how to shuffle a deck of cards. "Neither," he said. "I'm just a man who couldn't save his sister and didn't want to make that same mistake twice." Kellyanne's eyebrows lifted slightly. She hadn't expected that. "Your sister?" Duke nodded slowly. Her name was Angela, 22 years old. She died in an accident that got covered up by people with money and connections back before I understood how the world worked. Nobody ever answered for it. I carried that a long time. Anger like that, it sits in you like a stone. He paused, his jaw tight. When I saw what was happening to Maria Torres, saw her getting run down just for telling the truth about what she saw happen to that little boy, I recognized it. I'd seen it before. I wasn't about to sit by and watch it happen again. "Some say your presence outside her home was a form of intimidation," Kellyanne said carefully. "We never threatened a soul," Duke said, and his voice hardened, though not with anger, with conviction. "We sat outside her house so she could sleep without being afraid somebody was going to put another brick through her window. That's not intimidation. That's just watching out for somebody who needed it. And the accusations that Whitfield's team tried to bribe you?" Duke's eyes flicked to the camera. "That's true. They offered me money to walk away and let Maria get buried in this. I told them no. Then, they went and told a story about how my brothers and I were the criminals here. Funny how that works." He shook his head. "I got nothing to gain from any of this. Never asked for a dime. All I want is for the truth about that little boy to come out. And for Maria and her daughter to be safe." Kellyanne let a silence sit there a moment before she asked her final question. "What would you say to the people of Cedar Falls who are afraid of you?" Duke looked directly into the camera lens, his voice steady now. "I'd say judge me by what I do, not by the patch on my back. And I'd say the only person you ought to be afraid of in this whole story is the man who let a truck full of secrets keep driving after it hit a kid." That evening, miles across town, Carlos Mendez sat alone in his small apartment, the television glowing blue against his face. He hadn't meant to watch. He'd told himself he was done, that recanting his statement had been the smart thing, the safe thing. But something about Duke's voice, cracked open and honest, made his chest ache with shame. He sat there long after the broadcast ended, staring at his phone on the coffee table. Finally, he picked it up and dialed Duke's number, his hand trembling. "It's Carlos," he said when Duke answered. "I found something. Maintenance records. From an out-of-state garage. I think it's what you need." The county hearing room smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. Rows of folding chairs filled up fast that morning. More people than Maria had ever seen at one of these things. She sat at the front table, her hands folded tight in her lap, wearing the blue dress she'd bought for Sophia's kindergarten graduation. It was the nicest thing she owned. Beside her sat Diane Ferris, sharp in a gray suit, papers stacked neat in front of her. Diane had called 2 nights before, right after the interview aired. I saw what he said she'd told Maria over the phone. I saw what it cost him to say it. I should have never walked away. I'm not walking away again. Maria had cried when she hung up the phone. Not from sadness. From relief so big it felt like drowning. Now Diane leaned over and whispered, "Just tell them what you told me. Just tell them the truth. That's all you have to do." The hearing board sat behind a long table at the front of the room, 5 people in dark suits, faces unreadable. The chairwoman called the room to order, and Maria felt her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. "Ms. Torres," the chairwoman said, "please tell the board what you witnessed on the night in question." Maria stood. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice, when it came out, was steady. "I was walking home from my shift at the diner," she said. "It was almost dark. I saw a delivery truck run straight through the stop sign at Miller and Fifth. It hit Danny Reyes. He was on his bike." She paused, swallowing hard. The truck didn't stop. It just kept going. "I ran to him. I called 911 and I wrote down the license plate before I let myself think about anything else." "You're certain of what you saw?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Maria said. "That truck had the Whitfield Trucking logo on the side. I saw it as clear as I see you sitting there right now." A murmur passed through the room. Maria didn't look back at the crowd. She kept her eyes on the board, the way Diane had told her to. Somewhere behind her, she knew Duke was sitting in the 3rd row. Arms crossed, watching. She didn't need to turn around to feel it. It steadied her like a hand on her back. When she finished, Diane stood and addressed the board. "The board has already heard testimony regarding threats and intimidation directed at my client following her statement to police. I would now like to call Carlos Mendez, a former employee of Whitfield Trucking, to corroborate Ms. Torres's account." Carlos walked up from the back of the room, his shoulders squared in a way Maria hadn't seen before. He looked nervous, but he didn't look scared. Not anymore. "I worked as a mechanic for Whitfield Trucking for 6 years, Carlos said once he was sworn in. "I was fired after I refused to sign off on maintenance logs for the truck involved in the accident. The brakes had failed inspection twice. I was told to falsify the records anyway." He set 2 folders on the table in front of the board. "These are the falsified logs I was ordered to sign. And these," he tapped the second folder, "are the real records from an out-of-state garage that serviced the truck 3 weeks before the accident. The brakes were never fixed." The chairwoman opened the folders slowly, her eyes moving down the pages. The room had gone completely silent. Maria could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "These documents," the chairwoman said finally, looking up, "constitute clear evidence of falsified safety records and obstruction of this investigation." She turned to the officer standing near the door. "This board is formally referring Frank Whitfield for arrest on charges of obstruction of justice and evidence tampering." The room erupted into whispers. Maria turned and saw Frank Whitfield sitting near the back, his face gone pale and stiff. 2 officers moved toward him. He didn't fight them. He just sat there, stunned, as they pulled his arms behind his back and clicked the handcuffs shut. Maria stood frozen, watching. Then she felt Duke step up beside her, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. They just watched together as Frank Whitfield was led out of the room in handcuffs, past all the people who had once been too afraid to speak his name out loud. The Blue Plate Diner smelled like bacon and fresh coffee. Same as it always had. But things were different now, and everybody in Cedar Falls knew it. Maria walked the floor with a coffee pot in her hand, wearing the manager's badge pinned crooked on her apron. She'd gotten the promotion 3 months back, right after the town council passed the new trucking rules. Folks around town had started calling them Danny's Law before the ink was even dry on the paperwork. Every truck that came through Cedar Falls now had to pass a real inspection, logged and checked by someone who couldn't be bought off or scared into looking the other way. Danny Reyes was walking again, slow, with a limp that might never go away, but walking. His mom came in every Sunday now and hugged Maria so tight it near knocked the wind out of her. Tuesday morning came, same as it always did, and Duke Callahan walked through the diner door right on time. He still wore his leather jacket, still had that same scar above his eyebrow, still looked like a man you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. But the whole diner lit up when the bell over the door jingled and he walked in. "Morning, Duke," called old Mr. Feeney from the counter. Duke gave him a nod and settled into his usual booth by the window. Maria was already walking over with the coffee pot before he even sat all the way down. "Black, no sugar," she said, pouring it steady into his cup. "You remembered," Duke said, the corner of his mouth pulling up just slightly. It was as close to a smile as the man ever gave. 6 years of Tuesdays and Thursdays, Maria said. I'd have to be pretty foolish not to. From the back of the diner, Sophia came running, her sneakers squeaking against the tile floor. She wore her school clothes, but pinned right over her heart was a small leather patch, stitched careful and neat, the letters reading Honorary Angel. Duke's whole chapter had made it for her, sewed it themselves after a long talk at the clubhouse about what Sophia meant to all of them now. "Uncle Duke," she hollered, sliding into the booth across from him like she owned the place. "Hey there, kid," Duke said, and something warm passed behind his eyes, something that hadn't been there before Maria and Sophia came into his life. "Look," Sophia said, pointing proudly at her patch. "I'm a real angel now." "Damn right you are," Duke said, then caught himself and glanced up at Maria. "Sorry, darn right you are." Maria just laughed and shook her head, moving on to refill the coffee at the next table. The whole diner had grown used to this little routine, and nobody batted an eye anymore at the sight of a Hell's Angel letting a 6-year-old show him card tricks between sips of black coffee. An hour later, Duke stood up, dropped a 5 on the table even though Maria always tried to wave him off, and walked toward the door. Sophia hopped up after him, her patch catching the morning light through the window. "Got a long haul today," Duke said to Maria as he passed the counter. "Denver and back. Should be home by Thursday." "We'll be here," Maria said. Duke nodded once, tipped his head toward Sophia, and walked out into the parking lot. The whole diner watched through the big front windows as he swung his leg over his motorcycle and kicked the engine to life. It rumbled low and steady, like distant thunder rolling across a clear sky. 2 kids on bikes rode past on the sidewalk and waved at him. "Bye, Guardian," one of them shouted, and Duke lifted a hand off the handlebar just enough to wave back before pulling out onto the road. Maria stood in the doorway of the diner, Sophia beside her, the two of them watching Duke's motorcycle grow smaller down Main Street until it turned the corner and was gone. "Mommy," Sophia said, slipping her small hand into Maria's. "Uncle Duke's like a superhero, isn't he?" Maria looked down at her daughter, then back out at the empty road, thinking of everything that had brought them here. The stop sign, the brick through the window. The Knights Duke's motorcycle sat parked outside their house like a promise nobody had to speak out loud. "Yeah, baby," Maria said softly. "I guess he kind of is." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.